From the studios of the Security Officer Network, a Security Officer Network special, The Rise and Fall of Wackenhut Security. This special is brought to you by the Security Officer Network, the professional security officer's status symbol of choice. If you went to work in security during the 80s or the 90s, there's a pretty big chance that you got your start at one of the big three American security companies, Pinkerton, Burns, or Wackenhut. This is the story of the last of the big three, Wackenhut, the American security company that outlasted its two competitors and became the last of the big private security firms to carry the name of their founder, giving way to an era with the coldness of the massive international corporation with the strange acronym and the constantly changing branding. In 1954, when George Wackenhut quit the FBI, he set in order a series of events that impacted many of us who would eventually work for his agency. Wackenhut grew up near Philadelphia and served in the Army Corps of Engineers during World War II. After the war, he joined the FBI. In 1954, he resigned from the FBI, and soon thereafter, he and three other ex-FBI agents created their own investigation firm in Coral Gables, Florida. They called their firm Special Agent Investigators. Their use of this terminology, and the fact that they were ex-agents, caused a bit of concern within the FBI, where it was feared that the new agency was attempting to profit off of their former FBI status. Bureau officials were concerned that clients of this company might be led to believe that these agents still had some affiliation with the FBI, and FBI personnel were instructed to limit their contacts with the new company. These weren't the only early challenges faced by Wackenhut's special agent investigators. At one point in the early days, the company's assets supposedly consisted of just $1.56. The company employees reportedly had to pass the hat just to make payroll. In 1958, Wackenhut took sole control of the company and called it Security Services Corporation, an indication that his company would be offering more than just investigative service, but was perhaps moving into private security. Reportedly, after working in his agency's office during the day, he would personally work at night on shift as a security guard. Wackenhut's persistence finally paid off when Wackenhut obtained a major security contract with National Airlines of Miami. Not long after that, Wackenhut declared that his company had become licensed in 10 states, and he said it was the fourth largest company of its type in the nation. Indeed, the company's October 1962 newsletter does seem to reflect wide-ranging activity from Kansas to Puerto Rico. Financials show the company's gross revenues totaling just $89,700 in 1955, but surpassing $2 million by 1960 and $17 million in 1965. The company won high-profile government contracts, including the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, believed to have been a 350-man security police force that had previously been operated by Pan American. That contract was worth $44 million over 7 years. The company also won high-profile nuclear test site contracts in Nevada. Entitled The Soaring 60s, the bar chart on the cover of the company's 1969 report graphically highlighted just how much the revenues had exploded. In 1969, the company exceeded annual revenues of $48 million, with approximately 6,000 clients and 70 offices. And the company was well on its way to massive diversification. With the acquisition of several other security-related and security-adjacent companies, Wackenhut's services now ranged from alarm systems to security auditing to firefighting and prevention. This allowed Wackenhut to become less dependent on government contracts and drop the government-dependent percentage of its revenue down to just 14%. In the 1970s, Wackenhut continued its growth as one of its subsidiary companies won the contract to secure the 800-mile Alaska pipeline, both during its initial construction and later during its operational phase. By this time, Wackenhut had perhaps become known for what you think of when you think of a Wackenhut officer: iconic uniforms, as can be seen in this footage of a Wackenhut officer as he welcomes Terry Bradshaw to the stadium. By 1980, the company's annual revenues had reached $148 million, with 9,000 clients and 14,000 employees. At this time, Wackenhut diversified into high-technology electronic service offerings with its Wackenhut Series 4000 computers to enable the reduction of human guards. As a side note, so as you can see, the promise of technology replacing human officers has been ongoing for some time now. The company also boasted of its success in pre-departure screenings at airports. It credited this program as perhaps being a reason for the virtual elimination of the airline hijackings that had plagued American airports in the early 1970s. Wackenhut continued winning and working high-profile government contracts such as the Rock Ridge nuclear weapons site in Colorado, various U.S. embassies, and was even known to provide paramilitary services. Its 1983 three-year, $81 million contract at the Savannah River Nuclear Weapons Facility in South Carolina was the largest paramilitary security contract ever awarded by the U.S. government at that time. Wackenhut outbid 18 other bidders to win that contract and brought in 460 uniformed security professionals and 50 administrative support personnel as part of just this one single contract. In 1984, George Wackenhut attempted to take his company private for $24 per share. This would have allowed him to cash out and convert his holdings to cash. Wackenhut and his wife Ruth, their shares would have been worth about $49 million because at this time they still own 53.3% of the company. But financing fell through and the company remained public. That year, for the first time in many years, Wackenhut posted a loss of $1.8 million in 1984. $891,000 of that loss was spent on studying the failed privatization plan, even though it didn't work out. But Wackenhut bounced back. In 1987, Wackenhut created a subsidiary company, Wackenhut Corrections Corporation, WCC, to oversee its now growing number of private prison contracts. Facilities under WCC's control included prisons in Australia, England, and Puerto Rico, as well as 6 states in the United States. In the 1990s, that subsidiary would become a public company of its own, with Wackenhut retaining majority ownership. By the 1990s, however, a series of high-profile controversies began to create a bit of a toll on the company's public image. Remember that contract to protect the Alaska pipeline? Well, in 1991, the pipeline company issued a public apology after it was determined that they had used Wackenhut investigators to spy on a prominent critic of the pipeline company. The president of the company said the spying was wrong, and he pledged to never do it again. The matter resulted in congressional hearings and certainly brought less than optimal public attention to Wackenhut. Additionally, incidents at Wackenhut prisons, such as a 1990 escape of a suspected drug kingpin from a Texas prison, and a 1999 riot in its New Mexico prison, brought unfavorable public attention. And by the late 1990s, some state-level policy leaders had appeared to sour on the idea of private prisons altogether. But by now, George Wackenhut handed off the duties of the presidency of the company to his son, Richard Wackenhut, although George did remain the chair of the board. The post-9/11 world, with society's new focus on security, set to greatly benefit security providers. And that, perhaps, is what made Wackenhut an international acquisition target. International security firm Securitas had already bought Wackenhut's two American competitors, Pinkerton and Burns. Securitas's international rival, Group 4 Falck, wouldn't be left behind. Group 4 was the number 2 security company in the world, a $2.5 billion public company traded on the Copenhagen Stock Exchange. In 2002, they made a $570 million cash offer to buy out Wackenhut. Wackenhut would keep its name for a while, but the Wackenhut family would no longer be involved in the business it had built. Though he agreed to the offer, and though he received a parting compensation package of $124 million, George Wackenhut described his second thoughts to local reporters. It's like giving up your baby. In 2001, Wackenhut was recognized on Forbes' Most Admired American Companies list, and its 2001 financial reports showed 57,000 employees in its security services division and another 10,763 in its correctional services. Notably, it also showed annual revenues of $2.8 billion, quite an increase from the $89,700 of revenue in its first year back in 1955. But now, like Pinkerton and Burns Security before it, the American-owned Wackenhut would soon become a thing of the past. For several years, Group 4 continued to preserve the Wackenhut name with their American private sector security services now renamed G4S Wackenhut. However, the private prison operations were sold off to a group of buyers who renamed it to the Geo Group, a name it continues to hold to this day. The new G4S Wackenhut organization continued Wackenhut's tradition of iconic uniform branding. They issued what might have been the most unique security uniforms in the history of the industry of security uniforms. The company's Custom Protection Officers, CPOs, wore brown uniforms with a purple on black stripe and gold Wackenhut-styled badges. The Wackenhut brand received negative attention when a CBS report featured whistleblower testimony about the tendency of G4S's Wackenhut officers to fall asleep while on duty at a Pennsylvania nuclear facility. This reporting led the facility to terminate the contract in about 2008 or so. In 2010, perhaps to get away from the Wackenhut brand, G4S Wackenhut would rename itself G4S Security Solutions. And in 2021, G4S was bought out by Allied Universal. Now, one would likely be hard-pressed to find any evidence of the Wackenhut name in active use at security sites in the United States. If you can find evidence of it, let us know in the comments below. The take. As I was putting together the research for this video, I was struck by this article, an article demonstrating one of George Wackenhut's actual failures, a community's rejection of his privatized firefighting force. Ironically, Wackenhut had given up a career in public service with the FBI after just 3 years. As a private company executive, he successfully provided privatized public safety services to many government institutions. Yet, at some point, he also somewhat hit a ceiling. America, it seemed, only had so much appetite for privatized public safety, and at some level there was a stopping point. A paramilitary organization guarding a nuclear plant, airport screening services, privatized crash, fire, and rescue services at pseudo-governmental entities such as airports. All of these were acceptable, but community-level public safety ended up being another thing altogether. However, these days, times seem to be changing. In today's world, when America seems on the path to copying South Africa, where private security companies are thriving, it's almost as if a path is open for the next generation of George Wackenhuts, who will step in and provide a private security solution to truly fill the void of America's rapidly collapsing public safety sector. One almost has to wonder if Wackenhut wasn't just 75 years before his time. Perhaps America's appetite for privatized public safety services isn't any stronger than it was in Wackenhut's time. But now, unlike before, and in the next few years, it's almost as if America doesn't have any other choice. So what do you think? Did you ever work for Wackenhut? What was your experience like working for the Wackenhut Corporation? And would you like to see more videos like this? Let us know in the comments below, and remember, if you have yet to get your security officer membership, get it now by visiting securityofficernetwork.com.
Good luck trying to find a shrink in this town.